everyone. Good news, no dryer today, so it'll be nice and quiet in the background. We're going to do 1.7, calculating slope from ordered pairs. So when you're just given the ordered pairs, not given the graph. Now, in order to help us figure out how to do this, I have started with a graph, and we're going to find the slope of the graph here, of the line. We want to find the slope of this line. Also, it was really hard to see the grid lines, so I added some grid lines darker. I hope that doesn't confuse things. You can tell where the origin is, right? This is the origin right here. The x-axis goes out this way. The y-axis goes up this way. And here's our line. Hey, before we do anything, can you tell me, does this purple line have a positive slope or does it have a negative slope? Well, as we look from left to right, it's going down, so we know it has a negative slope. All right, so let's find our slope the old-fashioned way, the way we've already done. What's our formula for that? Slope is equal to rise over run. So remember, what we need to do is we need to find two pretty points, right? Not really a term, but what I call them. Two pretty points. So no. Oh, here's one. Goes right through that point, goes through those two grid lines where they meet right there, so that's perfect. No. Yeah, that looks good there. So, and then I think it's no. The next one's probably around here, but it's hard to tell because the grid lines are so faint. So there we go. There's our 2 points that we can use in order to find the slope. So we're going to draw that little triangle, right? So it doesn't matter which one you start at. I'll start at this one. In order to get down to that point, what would you have to do? You'd have to go down to here, and then you'd have to go across to here. So there's our rise and our run. So let's count it up here. So I counted as 1, 2, 3 this way, and 1, 2, 3, 4 this way. So our rise over run is equal to 3 over 4. But wait a minute, remember what we said at the start of this question? This is actually a negative slope, so then I would then add a negative to make the slope negative. Now, some of you, when I was counting this, might have yelled at your computer screen, you did it wrong, because there's another way you could do this, right? When I moved from this point and I wanted to get this point, I moved down 1, 2, 3. Oh, moving down is a negative move. And then from there, I moved right. That's a positive move. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's positive 4. So you have negative 3 over 4, which is exactly what we had there. So you can either slap the negative on at the end, or when you're doing the counting, you can take the negatives into account. All right, so here's what I want to do. I want to see how would we have figured out the slope of this line if we didn't know the graph. We didn't have the graph. We only knew what points these were. So what I want to do right now is I want to figure out what point is this and what point is this. I want ordered pairs for this. All right, let's start with this one. We start at the origin, right? When we want to say what point this is, we start at the origin and we count over 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first value, the x value, I don't think I made a big deal of that last time, but I should have. The first point is called the x. So the x value is 4 along the x-axis, and then we went up 2. So the y value is 2. So there's your x and y for the first point. Our second point. All right, we start here. How far should you go left or right? You shouldn't, because it's straight up. So your x value is 0. Don't move in the x direction, and then move up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's your second point. Now, from looking at these 2 points, can you figure out how you could have gone straight? Like, remember, we're not looking at this anymore. Pretend we don't know this. How could we have taken these 2 points right here and gotten this answer here? It's not easy. Take a look at the first 2 points. We have a 4 and a 0. 4 and 0. Give you a hint. That'll help you get the second number, the bottom number, the denominator. And the second number here is 2 and 5. That'll help you get the negative 3. You figure it out? If you subtract them, right? If you take on the top, if you do 2 take away 5 on the top, so this one take away this one, 2 take away 5. And on the bottom, if you go 4 take away 0, 2 take away 5 is negative 3, and 4 take away 0 is 4. We get negative 3 over 4, just like the answer was there. So that gives you a sense of what you have to do. You got to take the different points and you got to do some subtraction. So let's put this all in words and everything. When you're finding the slope of a line that passes through 2 ordered pairs, whoa, is this looking complicated? First thing it says is slope, because this is a formula for slope, and I've put m in brackets. Remember why? because that's the letter we use to designate slope. Weird, but true. Okay, next thing, it says equals rise over run. Right? Just a reminder for you there, it equals rise over run. But usually we only use the rise over run formula. We use this when you have a graph. If you actually have the graph like we did here before I rubbed it all out, that is where you would use rise over run. But if you don't have a graph, if you only have the points, you're going to use this. Use when you have ordered pairs. Okay, so let me describe this for you. So rise over run, then it says triangle. Remember what triangle means? It means change in. Because what you want to do is you want to figure out what's the change. Let me get rid of this. We found the change in the y values, right? When we got the -3, that was the change in the y, and the change in the x. Change in y is rise, change in x is 4. So that's why it says change in y and change of x. Now, if we just have the points, though, the way we're going to get the change in y and the change of x is we're actually going to subtract, right? That's what I did here. I did 2 take away 5 and got -3. I did 4 take away 0 and got 4. So basically what this is saying is you're taking your two y values and subtracting them, and then you're dividing by your two x values, which you subtract. So up here again, we have our two y values, the 2 and the 5, subtract those, do it on top, and you have your two x values, 4 and 0. Put those on the bottom, subtract, you get the answer. Now if you're really strict about it, I actually didn't do this like the formula says. It says to do y2. That's the y of the second point. So let me show you that that would work too. If I called this my first point here, this would be the x value of the first point, and this is the y value of the first point. This is the x value of the second point, and this is the y value of the second point. And what the formula says to do is to go y2 minus y1, so maybe I'll just write this down. Slope equals y2 minus y1 divided by x2 over x1. So let's start with our y2. That is 5. And we're going to subtract our y1, which is 2. Notice that's not actually what I did here. I did 2 minus 5. Don't worry, it's not going to make a difference. Then I take my x2, which is 0, and I subtract my x1, which is 4. So what do I get when I do that? Well, 5 minus 2 is 3, and 0 take away 4 is -4. So I get 3 over -4. But you know what? In a fraction, you don't usually put the negative in the bottom. You either put it out front, like this, out front, or you put it in the numerator. So all these three things are equal to each other. We just don't usually write it this way. So, these are great, and that's exactly what you got there. So this formula here is what we're going to be using to find the slope when you have two ordered pairs. And what you've just noticed as I'm doing this, you need to be able to subtract integers. I know some of us don't like subtracting integers. We don't like integers at all, some of you. Integers meaning negative numbers. So I want to give you a very quick, I don't want the video to be half an hour, so I'm going to give you a very quick reminder of how to subtract integers. There's different ways to do it. The way that I have had the most success with students is to just use these three words: add the opposites. In other words, when it comes to subtraction, my one word advice for you is don't subtract. Just don't do it. It's too hard. It confuses people. So what I encourage you to do is to add the opposite. So for example, if you were doing -6, take away -3. I would not subtract. It's too hard to subtract. So here's what I do. I keep the first number exactly the same. It stays as -6. But I'm going to add. I don't want to subtract. I want to add. So I just change this to plus. Now how can you possibly do that? Just change the subtraction question into positive question, an adding question, sorry. The reason you can do that is if you also change the sign of this second number. So you know how it says -3 here? We're going to change it into +3. And now we have an adding question, which is easier. Okay, but you might say, I don't remember how to add integers. Now there's all sorts of ways to do adding integers. Some people think of elevators, or they think of money, or they think of number lines. I think of two questions. Here's the questions. Question 1. Are there more positives or negatives? So for example, in this question we're doing here, I have 6 negatives and I have 3 positives. I mean, I could literally write 6 negatives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I could write 3 positives. What are there more of? Is there more negatives or positives? Well, there's more negatives, right? There's definitely more negatives. So because there's no more negatives, I know my answer is going to be negative. Okay, the second question I ask myself is, how many more are there? If there's 6 of these guys and 3 of these guys, how many more negatives are there? There's 3 more. So my answer is negative 3. That's how I do it. So let's try some more of these just to give you a little practice. First of all, if it's an adding question, we're happy. Don't change anything. Just go straight to the 2 questions. So the first question, are there more positives or are there more negatives? So we have 4 negatives. What are these? If there's no sign in front of it, it's positive. So we have 4 negatives, we have 8 positives. We have more positives. So we know our answer is going to be plus or positive. So right, you don't even need to put it, right? If it's a positive answer, you don't even need to put it. You can, it's not wrong, but you don't need to. Now, how many more positives other than negatives? There's 8 positives, there's 4 negatives. That's 4 more positives. So my answer is 4, or if you want, positive 4. Okay, next one. Ugh, subtraction. I don't want to subtract. So what do? I write a new question. I add the opposite. I keep the first number the same, never switch the first one. I don't want to subtract, I actually want to add. Now how can you do that? You can do that if you change the sign of the second one. So instead of being negative 2, it's going to be positive 2. Now we're ready to add, right? So now we use the 2 questions. Are there more positives or negatives? We have 3 negatives, we have 2 positives. Well, there's more negatives. 3 is bigger than 2, so there's more negatives. How many more negatives are there? There are 1 more negative than there is positive. This is my answer, negative 1. Okay, let's move on. Uh-oh, another subtraction question. I don't want to subtract, so I'm going to add the opposite. Don't do anything to the first number. Always leave that the same. I want to add, I don't want to subtract. How can I do that? I can do that if I change the sign of the second one, so it's actually going to be positive 5. So it's just a simple question now, 6 plus 5. Our 2 questions will still work though. Are there more positives or negatives? Well, I have 6 positives here and 5 positives there. I only have positives. Obviously, I have more positives, so the answer is positive. How many more positives are there? Well, again, there's 6 positives here and another 5. That's a whole lot of positives. There's actually 11 positives here, and that's 11 more than negatives because there's no negatives. So that's the answer. All right, next one. An adding question. Don't change anything. We like our adding questions. Leave it. So we go straight to the 2 questions. Is there more positives or negatives? Well, these are negative, and these are also negative. There's definitely more negatives because there's no positives. How many more negatives are there? Well, there's 5 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's 8 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How many more negatives are there than positives? Well, there's 5 and 8 more. That's 13. There are 13 more negatives than positives. Okay, another subtraction question. Don't want to subtract. What do? We change it into an addition question. Leave the first one the same, change it to plus, and then we change the sign of the second one. So it should be negative 10. Instead of positive 10, it's negative 10. Now go to the 2 questions. What do you have more of, positives or negatives? Definitely more negatives. How many more? There's 10 negatives. There's only 7 positives. That means we have 3 more negatives. So we're done. And the last one. It's another subtraction question. We do not want to subtract. So we leave the first number the same. We change it to an adding question. We can only do that if we change the sign of this. So it was positive 10. I'm going to make it negative 10. Now go to the 2 questions. Do you have more positives or negatives? These are negative. These are also negative. They're all negative. So we definitely have more negatives. How many more negatives do you have? Well, we have 4 negatives and another 10. That makes 14 negatives, and there's no positives to counteract those. So negative 14 is your answer. All right. Now that we've done all that, we can actually find the slope of a line that passes through some points. If you want, you could start by putting x1, because that's the first x value, y1, that's the first y value, x2, that's the second x value, y2, that's the second y value. It's up to you. You probably don't need to, but you can. So what was our slope again? Slope, I'm just going to put m because that's what slope means, is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So let's plug in. y2 is 6 minus, now you might want to even put them all in brackets. So we have the 6 in brackets, take away y1. y1 is negative 7, so I'll put that in brackets too. over x2 is 5, I'll put that in brackets, minus x1 is 3, I'll put that in brackets. Okay, on the bottom, easy, 5 take away 3, no problem there. We have 2, right? On the top, more tricky. So we want to switch this to an adding question on the top. So if you want, you can actually do this right in the question. You can do this. I want to add the opposite. Keep the first one the same, change it to an adding question, but you can only do that if you change the sign of the second number. So this would actually become positive 7. So you have 6 plus positive 7. Oh, it's all positives. It's just 6 plus 7. 6 plus 7 is 13. So this is your slope. It's in lowest terms. You could make it 6.5 if you want, but we'll just leave it like that. Okay, next one. Again, slope is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. It can also be y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2. It doesn't matter. You could do subtract the y's in any order and then subtract the x's, and make sure you subtract the x's in the same order that you did the y's. All right, so I'll do it this way again. This is an x1, this is a y1, this is an x2, and this is a y2. So y2 is negative 3, I'll put it in brackets, minus y1 is 0, x2 is negative 6, minus x1 is negative 2. Okay, well, the top's not bad. Negative 3, take away nothing. When you take away nothing from something, it just stays the same, so this is still negative 3. On the bottom, I want to change this to an adding question. Keep the first one the same, change it into an adding question. You can only do that if you also change the sign of the second one. All right, now we use our two questions. What do you have more of, negatives or positives? We have 6 negatives, 2 positives. We definitely have more negatives. Okay, how many more do you have? If you have 6 negatives and 2 positives, you have 4 more. So here's our answer. Negative 3 over negative 4. Wait a minute, that's weird. Negative, negative? If you have 2 negatives, you know what you actually have? You actually have a positive. So 3 over 4 is the actual answer for the slope. We got to do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So again, this can be my x1, my y1, my x2, my y2. So I'm going to do y2, which is 12, take away y1, which is 6. And then on the bottom, I have x2, which is negative 8. And I'm subtracting x1, which is also negative 8. Okay, on the top, it's just a straightforward 12 take away 6. 12 take away 6 is 6. On the bottom, take away any integers. Let's not subtract. Let's add the opposite. So keep the first one the same, change it to plus. You can only do that if you also change the sign of the second number. Now we're ready for our two questions. What do you have more of, negatives or positives? You have 8 negatives, you have 8 positives. What? You got exactly the same amount. They all cancel each other out. You know what you're left with on the bottom? You're left with 0. 6 divided by 0. Do you remember what I told you about in the last video? You can't divide it by 0. So what's that mean? That means it is undefined, or if you want, no slope. Do you remember what kind of line that means that is? This must be a vertical line. If it has no slope, it must be a vertical line. So no slope on that one. All right, finally, last one, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Here's our x1, here's our y1, here's our x2, here's our y2. So y2 is 2, y1 is also 2, x2 is negative 4, and x1 is 12. Okay, so on the top, easy, 2 take away 2. Well, that's 0. On the bottom, subtraction, I don't want to subtract, so I'm going to add. Keep the first one the same, add, and you can only add if you change the sign of the second one. So the second one was positive, right? There's no sign in there, which means it's positive. So now it has to be a negative. I'm going to slap a negative in there. So we can use our two questions now. What do we have more of, positives or negatives? We have 4 negatives, and we also have 12 negatives. That's a whole lot of negatives, all negatives. How many more negatives do we have than positives? Well, we have 4 negatives and another 12 negatives, which makes 16 negatives. But really, the bottom number doesn't even matter, right? Because if you do 0 divided by something, 0 divided by anything is 0. The slope of this line is 0. Remember what kind of line that means it is? It is a horizontal line if it has a slope of 0. Okay, everyone, hoping that makes sense. If not, let me know. I'm here to help.